Welcome everyone to Game On, the YouTube series started by G2G.News, where we intend to have conversations with various stakeholders in the gaming industry. Today we have with us Professor I. Nelson Rose, who really needs no introduction in the world of online gaming. But just for our viewers, Professor Rose is one of the most well-known and preeminent experts in the world of gambling law. He is an expert witness. He has appeared in several legal cases and also, in several legislatures. He advises governments across the world on issues of gambling law, and he has written several books on the subjects as well. And his column Gambling and the Law and the website gamblingandthelaw.com is very popular for timely views and blogs on issues pertaining to gambling law. Professor Rose is also a Professor Emeritus at the Whittier College and visiting professor at the University of Macau. Welcome, Professor Rose. It is an honor to have you on the show. Welcome to Game On.
Well, thank you, Jay. And I have been following your work for years, and I think you are definitely one of the preeminent scholars on gambling law in all of India, and you're making quite a name for yourself around the world too.
Thank you, Professor Rose. Very kind of you. I want to, begin by talking about the age-old debate back in US and in India as well on games of skill and games of chance. That debate never seems to really end either in India or in US and in many other places across the world. In India, we follow what is called the predominant or substantial skill test, which is laid down by the Supreme Court in context of horse racing. But now online skill-based gaming, as it is so called, has become exponentially popular in India, especially after COVID-19, and it's expected to hit $7 billion in revenues in the next few years. And but there is constant litigation at the same time in India on what's a game of skill, what's not, and companies are really pushing the envelope in terms of new offerings and new games, including poker, daily FantasySports, Rummy, which is a card game popular in India, and several other card and dice-based games. So just wanted to know from you, what's the position like in US on the predominance test, and how does it go state-wise?
Yes, well, thank you. And thank you again for inviting me to speak. I have been writing about the different tests and what's going on with skill versus chance for many years now. I graduated Harvard Law School in 1979. My classmate is Chief Justice of the United States. I didn't know him, but I did play poker with his roommate like 5 nights a week during my final semester. And a lot of those are on my website, gamblingandthelaw.com. Gambling in the United States is definitely a state issue, not a federal issue. In fact, the federal law, there's very few federal laws, and they're usually written to say, if it is illegal, then you can't use interstate communications, with no definition of what illegal is. So it is up to the states, and you hit upon the really important issue. I always tell my law students the important thing to do in almost any case is convince the court that your test is the proper test, and the way you define your test is the proper test. And of course, the test you want is the one that helps your clients. So we do have, in general, the test is the predominant test, whether chance predominates over skill, and it can be at any point in the whole process. So if you, well, there's a famous test in case in California where they were throwing darts at a board, and if you won, you get the prize. And darts, they decided that's a game of skill, but the prize is a bingo card. And then to win the money prize, you have to play bingo. And the way the operator made his money is he would sell bingo cards as well. And bingo is not a game of skill. So, in general, it is the predominant test, although the courts do fudge that a lot. Um, in New York, for example, there's a very recent case and a fight going on right now over daily fantasy sports on using a different test, the material element test. And I think the easiest way to understand the difference is poker. If you're honest about poker, particularly tournament poker, poker is predominantly skill. We have professional poker players. We don't have professional lottery players, right? Um, in New York, they decided to use the material test. And with the material test, they then say, oh, an amateur can sit down and against a professional and get dealt a royal flush and beat the professional. Well, yeah, that's true. But first of all, poker is never played one hand.
Yeah.
But courts that so the material element test says a single hand of poker because the cards are random. That's a material element. The predominant test should say that poker is predominantly skill because in the long run, skillful players win more and lose less. But there are courts that have held that poker was a game of chance because they use the time frame of a single hand. And if you use the time frame of a single hand, then you can say, oh, in a single hand of poker, chance is predominant. So even with the tests, you have to be careful, basically not to cheat. and and I, while preparing for this presentation, the interview with you, I noticed there's so much going on with India, particularly about internet.
Yes.
With in the United States, the fights, I think I would say, are mostly daily fantasy sports, which of course is an issue in India too, but also machines. And in more than half a dozen states in the United States, the operators have put in basically slot machines and have called them games of skill and have said, well, it's predominantly skill. And the most typical game will be a nudge game, where if you get two winning symbols and the third one is above or below the line, you can nudge it. And if it's a winning symbol above the line, you nudge it down. Now you have three winning symbols on the pain line. I personally think that's hard to argue. That's a predominantly skill, but they say, well, the skill is noticing the symbol is above or below the line, and they give a short period of, they only give you 10 or 12 seconds. Some operators then, there's one operator who says, well, you can also press a button and play a true game of skill that gives you, you have to remember 20 different symbols in a row exactly right. And remembering 20 gets to be up to skill. By the way, what's happening with the daily fantasy sports is, in general, I would say the operators are losing. the operators, the courts, and other decision makers like the head regulator of Nevada casinos, and the United States Treasury in terms of the taxes have said daily fantasy sports is a game of chance, where season-long fantasy sports is a game of skill.
Professor Rose, on the predominance test, in your experience in the cases you have dealt with, how does one go on to show the predominance of skill in a game? Is it data? Is it statistics? Or is it just prior case laws? And what if a game does not have any prior case laws?
It's everything. If you, I've written about this, for almost 40 years now, although I don't want to give away my age. I can just say, well, I must have been 5 years old, when I began. But I've given legal opinions on games that are games of skill, predominantly skill. And there are at least 6 tests that have been developed. And in fact, it's interesting, the trial courts have tended to rule that even the machines, various machines, even the crane game, which comes down and grabs, right? That those are predominantly skilled. Trial courts like having live witnesses and demonstrations. So you put on a demonstration, you bring in an expert, and the expert wins. That's a pretty good test that it's predominantly skill. On appeal, when it's just a dry paper record, I wonder if things will change if they start having videos more. But the courts of appeal have tended to overturn the trial court particularly when they realize, wait a minute, if we rule poker is a game of skill, then everybody can open up, poker rooms. Among the various tests, for example, there is a learning curve that says when you first play a new game, you don't know really how to play, so your skill element isn't very strong. But if you play it 100 times, your amount of skill and will influence the outcome much more, and you win. You will learn more. So the amount of information that you learn about a game between the first and second time you play it is great. The information you learn and the skill you learn between the 100th game and the 101st game is less. And so the amount of knowledge you gain on each subsequent game is less. But if there's no learning curve, I mean, you can play lottery 1,000 times and you still can't improve your chances
so
of
if you
winning.
can practice and make yourself better, that is a factor in determining.
Yes, practice improves play.
And,
right?
and empirical data about whether the regular players keep winning, that is also a relevant factor in
yeah. In fact, usually if the parties, the operator has the resources, it's usually good to actually run tests. So, for example, you take a skillful player and a novice, an amateur who has never played the game, and have them play the game. And the expert better win more, or you better settle the case, that the expert does better.
So you say it's desirable to do such sample tests before the operator actually launches such a game?
I don't know if it's better to do it before launching the game, but it's certainly better before going into court. if you're going to go into court, you probably should have an expert who can testify about what the tests are for the games of skill. You should run these tests and have some statistician look at the results and show what a learning curve is. There are other tests, for example, of one of the interesting things that's going on with poker is the statistical tests, like you said, where we have shown that a majority of the hands in poker are won without seeing
showdown,
without the showdown. Well, therefore, without a showdown, you cannot say that the best hand won, because the Texas Hold'em, where each person gets 2 cards and somebody makes a bet and everybody else folds. Well, how can you say that the winner had the best 5-card poker hand? There never was a 5-card poker hand. So the statistics show that the game of poker is not won by the player with the best hand. The game of poker is won by the player who is the best player. Let me tell you, by the way, I am involved right now as an expert witness on an interesting case in France where, and I got permission from the lawyers that I can discuss this because I'm an expert witness, I'm not the lawyer. Player A won a lot of money, hundreds of thousands of US dollars from player B. And player B doesn't want to pay. And so the question is poker gambling? And this is live in-person gambling. And France not only has the predominant test, it also says a game of skill is based on, it translates into bodily movement, because the test was developed for archery,
right,
and other real physical games. Well, I gave it's on appeal right now, and I gave an expert witness statement showing that live in-person poker does involve skillful bodily movements because of bluffs.
Yes.
And tells.
Yes.
In fact, almost by definition, bluffs and tells involve bodily movements, including
or the lack thereof, or the lack
right. Or even where it gets real interesting is faking the bodily movement, faking a false tell to get the other player to bet when you have a super strong hand. I even went through, everybody knows the phrase poker face.
Yeah.
That shows how much bodily movements are part of the skill of live in-person poker. By the way, have you ever seen a big hand for the little lady, the movie?
No, I have not.
Okay, you have to rent it. A big hand for the little lady, and without giving it away, it really involves bodily movements to play the game of poker.
Right. So on India, as you said, there is a lot happening in terms of court cases all over, and I was I had the privilege of appearing in one or two in a case which indeed our side won, where but the concern is a lot of states are seeing the social concerns, the social impacts of these online games, particularly when there is wagering involved, when there is a fee involved, and there is win and loss involved. There were a lot of cases of suicides and other
really?
player losses and other social issues where players committed theft or took loans and couldn't repay and lost the
Yes.
money. So, so states have come up with this law, and what a lot of us, the lawyers and the top 4 or 5 lawyers in India actually from Delhi appeared in all these matters for the gaming companies. So it was really interesting, where it was argued that once it is established as a game of skill, for example, the card game of Rummy or daily fantasy sports, then it is elevated to the right of trade and commerce, which is guaranteed as a fundamental right under the Constitution. And
Yes.
state by law cannot ban it, and any law has to be struck down as being unreasonable.
Right.
Unless, because it's a total ban, states can bring in certain regulations, for example, on the age, on the stakes, and on other things.
Right.
So,
Yes.
so the concern over here is that the state's reply is that we are not concerned whether it's a game of skill or not. Once there is betting involved, once there is a wager or any money
Yes.
involved, any stakes involved, that is where we have a problem because it causes a social problem.
Right.
Is that sort of the concern down there in US also, or is that sort of a test applied in US?
There's still almost always the fight is still over whether it's skill versus chance, because as you know, gambling requires all 3 elements:
Yes,
consideration, staking money,
and
a
price.
prize, a prize of value,
Yeah,
and skill versus chance. So there's still the fight is there. There is a case going on right now in Virginia where the state legislature actually outlawed all games of skill as well as games of chance if money is involved.
right.
And the court ruled that the case will go forward. It's hard. We don't have, in general, we don't have a right to commerce like you have in India. There are states that say that. Nevada, interestingly, is one of them. But so you have to find a part of the Constitution that applies.
Right.
And in Virginia, they decided that it was discrimination because it's discriminating against small operators who have machines that are games of skill, supposedly. And now the state legislature said, we don't care. All games of skill are illegal also. They're also using free speech, which is a little harder to get there. There's another case, an older case out of California that said it's discrimination because you're choosing which games of skill to outlaw.
Right.
So although the argument in India is a little stronger. You can have your game of skill, you just can't play it for money. But the problem is if you start getting into outlawing games of skill
For money.
for money, like what about a golf tournament?
That's exactly what the Chief Justice asked the state.
Right.
If I'm
You
playing
can't.
tennis with my brother judge, there were 2 judges sitting. So
Yes.
he asked this question: if I play a game of tennis and I bet 100 rupees with my brother judge, would you come
Right.
and arrest me? That's
Well, yes, right. And
and when he got the answer, that's when he decided, I'm going to strike down this law.
was the answer yes, that we could arrest you?
I mean, the advocate general, sort of, he couldn't give
Right.
yeah.
Try not to give the answer because you know what the answer is.
He said read the law in a different way. He was trying to take
yes.
But so that's but broadly what you are saying is that stakes or money is irrelevant once a game is proven to be a game of skill.
Yes, because if a game is let's take not daily fantasy sports, but season-long fantasy sports,
Right.
which pretty much, I think everybody now agrees, is predominantly skill. Well, you can pay money to participate in the season-long fantasy league games, and if you win, you get the pot minus the operator's big share, whatever it is. And if it is predominantly skill, it simply is not gambling. So now you can regulate games of skill. Certainly, games of skill like age limits.
Yes.
You can say they have to be over 16 or 18 or 21, or in Canada, I think it's 20. But it's it becomes a different set of regulations, because if you really start trying to outlaw or regulate or even prohibit games of skill, what you're really saying is an activity that is more skill than chance you can't make money at. Well, that's farming. That's everything.
Yes.
I mean, if you're a farmer, you don't know if it's going to rain and wash out your crops. And just about every human activity will then become subject to the law. Even the game of chess.
Absolutely.
Right? As long as they're a chess tournament, they would have to outlaw chess tournaments
with an entry fee.
With an entry fee, right? If it's free, yeah. I mean, a lot of my clients try to. You want to eliminate one of the three elements. So we're talking about skill versus chance.
Right.
But if it's a free entry, I've helped clients develop the no purchase necessary idea, like no purchase necessary sweepstakes. Coca-Cola runs games all the time where you may have your entry is under the bottle cap. So you open a bottle of Coca-Cola and you can see whether you're a winner or not. Well, they will also say, go online and you can get a free entry. Right? So you don't have to buy the Coca-Cola, even though 98% of all the players enter by buying the Coca-Cola. As long as you have some who legitimately enter just by going online, well, it's no purchase necessary. The no prize idea is interesting. This is the freemium idea. Like one of my clients is King, who developed Candy Crush. And Candy Crush, they're making $1 billion a year, and yet you never have to pay a penny, and you can't win anything.
Yes.
But getting up to the next level is a prize that people want, even though you can't cash it in. And the way they make their money is you don't have to pay. If you're stuck at a level, you don't have to pay. You can wait till the next day and you get more free chances to go to the next level in the game. Or you can pay a small amount. Microeconomics, right? Microcurrencies where it's never, well, now they're getting bigger, but it used to be always less than $1, 99 cents, and you get 3 more entries. And they make hundreds of millions of dollars on that. It's pretty amazing.
Right. So, and the other thing is in US as well, like in India, there is, great popularity of not just daily fantasy, but other skill-based platforms like Skills, where there are various games offered, which are skill-based games. Again, in few states, it is allowed. in others it is not. I think in 8 or 10 states it's not
Right.
allowed to offer. So how is that seen? Is there any litigation going on these formats, these platforms as well?
I think again the interesting fights. Well, there's a lot of different fights because it's up to each state, right, to decide. So uh, there's a lot of fights over machines. Like Virginia has these slot machines that they call games of skill. Georgia has a uh, they call them COAM, and I can't even remember. Oh, they're amusement machines, but they do say games of skill, and it includes video poker games. Um, the daily fantasy sports it's still a big issue, but it's much less important because the Supreme Court of the United States in May 2018 ruled that the federal government cannot stop the states from legalizing gambling.
Right.
So, and the one form of gambling really that is still illegal in the United States is sports betting. So, immediately over the last 3 years, we've had 20 states have legalized real sports betting. And with
Online.
real,
This is online.
it's, well, actually, no, it is true sports betting. It starts about half of them. You have to go into a
A shop.
casino.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. But the other, and then the other half say you can go into the shop, or you can do it online. And of course, and by the way, the numbers show that if you can do it online, you get 5 times as many players rather than, and 5 times as much money. So daily fantasy sports is not as much interest anymore because people can bet on true sports events. Poker is still, a real hot issue. And of course, as I've seen from my clients, people are developing games.
What about backgammon?
Backgammon is an older game, obviously an older game, but it's also the cases are older and the courts are split because of the dice and the doubling cube. And I think today it's so clearly got skill that nobody is even fighting it anymore. Even in the states where it was declared to be gambling, I've never heard of anybody being arrested anymore.
So it's taken as a game of skill.
You have in the law 2 different standards, right?
Right.
The first is the law, which is, let's figure out what the test is in the law. Is it the test of predominance, or is it, say, material element? Then you have the real world. Right. And the real world is no policeman is going to want to arrest do a raid on a backgammon club. And even if they do make arrests, the prosecutors don't want to go to court because they're afraid they'll get laughed out of court, that the jury, even if they get to the stage where there's a jury trial, they might find their name in the newspaper, right? And so there are, I can't see anybody today going after season-long fantasy sports.
Right.
Poker tournaments are the same way.
Probably, would you say they actually go after the money-making games where there is real money?
Well, first of all, yeah, it's got to be real money. Here is actually, I've done a lot of research and study on this, right? And um, law enforcement is really only interested if, well, first of all, if you flaunt it, I mean, if you opened a casino, in the middle of downtown, you're going to
Right.
be in trouble, right? But in general, they really only care about organized crime, um, consumer fraud,
Right.
which with the internet could be. Um, those are the two big ones: organized crime and consumer fraud. But I always warn my clients, or they make a mistake, and there are some interesting cases. There was a guy in Texas. They raided his house. They grabbed all of his computers because they thought he was a bookmaker, that he was taking bets on sports events. He wasn't. He was just a really big time active bettor. And the way the police get evidence is they raid the house and then they sit there and they wait for the telephone to ring or the computer bets to come in. Well, he didn't have any because he wasn't a bookie. He was simply a bettor. And the reason the case uh, actually went to court is he wanted his computers back. So he sued the state and the prosecutors, the police, and their answer was, well, we haven't yet figured out what to charge him with, but we'll figure out something, because once the wheels of government start rolling, they have to, they're very hard to stop.
Right. Uh, so final question, for you on taxation. You just wrote a blog
Yeah.
recently on taxation, how the taxation should be. What, in your view, is the ideal scenario for taxing online gaming or gaming in general? And should there be a different regime for skill-based games and casino or chance-based games?
Good question. The I was hired by the state of Delaware when 10 years ago, they were one of the only states that was allowed to have true sports betting. And they tried it 30 years ago and it failed because, it's a state lottery running sports betting, and they didn't really know what they were doing. So now they're doing it again. And they asked me to basically set the tax limit, recommend what it should be. And so there's a lot of interesting research out there and studies that show, first of all, it should never, ever be above 50%, because if the
And
government
it should
takes,
never be on the bet, it should always be on the operator fee.
yes,
Because
yes,
in India, that is also the taxman is struggling with that, whether to charge 28% on the bet or
oh,
on the value that the operator is earning, ultimately the platform fee or the operator fee.
right now there's an old US federal law that says 2.5% of the amount bet on a sports event, win or lose, I mean, both sides, they have to pay 2.5% of the amount bet. Well, the margin in sports betting is so small that you can't do it.
Right.
But even so, they finally changed the law and said legal sports betting, it's 0.5%. That still is 5 or 6% of the amount that the house wins. So in New York, they just set the rate on sports betting at like up to 65% of gross gaming revenue, of the amount that is won. And there is, of course, the federal. which means that extra 0.5% on the amount wagered, that's another 5%. So now the operator, before any expenses or other taxes, has to give 71% to the government. You can't make money with that. The 50% rule is interesting. If the tax is over 50%, then the operators feel we don't owe the business anymore. The government is the senior partner. It's their business. They get the majority of the money. The other thing is it has to be certain and set. And everywhere, every gambling operation in the world that I have looked at, once they legalize whatever amount the tax is, if it is successful, government gets greedy and raises it. And if you're an operator, you don't want to build a $1 billion casino to find that the government is going to double the taxes next year.
Right.
Also, by the way, the big issue, I'll tell you what the big issue for taxes is. Of course, it should be fair. And that is where you get into the question, should the taxes be less for a game of skill or maybe even more? I mean, it should be fair. It should be equal for various businesses. But also, taxes should be designed to back up, support whatever the reason is you are legalizing. So governments, people, states legalize casinos to make money for the state, but also create jobs.
Right.
Well, the higher the tax on the casino, the less money will be spent building the casino and the fewer jobs will be created.
Absolutely. And it would only move the, give incentive to the operator to move to the black or to move to off the book transactions. As we have seen in India in horse racing and lottery, where there is 28% on the bet, not hardly 10% of the transactions get reported and the rest just happen off the books.
Yes, that's what happened with sports betting in the United States. When the tax, now what you're talking about is like 28% of the pool of money.
Yes.
Okay. The law in the United States was 2.5% of the amount bet. So if you bet $10, 2.5% of that has to go to the government. It's like a sales tax.
In India, it's 28 for the amount bet, 28%.
Right. But yeah, now it turns out like the standard sports bet in the United States is you bet $11 to win 10. And if the tax is on the amount bet, the operator is going to have a hard time making a profit. And they're forgetting about the problems of making sure equal amounts of money are bet on both sides. You have all the additional expenses. You have employees, you've got the building, you've got electricity, you've got other taxes. So you are absolutely right. The tax should be on gross gaming revenue, which means basically the win.
Yes.
You take it, all the money that comes in, the money that goes out in prizes, what's left, that's the gross gaming revenue. And that's what should be taxed.
And ideally, that should be less than 50%.
Always less than 50%, or you're going, and set in the law, not by regulators. It should be by statute so that it can't be easily changed. So the operators know how much it's going to be in advance. And by the way, government will get greedy anyway. They'll figure out a way. They'll raise the taxes or they'll charge. Oh, my favorite one is in Mississippi. I was talking to the head of the, I gave a talk, and this head of the state legislature of Mississippi said, well, we never raised the taxes. And when we had opened casinos and they were very successful. And I said, no, you just decided to charge a $1 entry fee for everybody who walked into the casino. And the casino isn't going to stop and ask each person for $1. It was just a tax.
Right.
You know, you get 1,000 people, the casino says, all right, we have to give the state another $1,000.
That's as good as a tax.
Yeah, it's as good as a tax.
Thank you, Professor Rose, for your time. It was a really educative conversation, very, very instructive. Lot of learnings back in India. I'm sure the viewers will find it interesting. Thank you once again.
Well, thank you so much. I'm now that COVID is gone, I'm hoping to be able to start traveling again. So if you ever need any help in India, let me know.
We would look forward to having you in India soon, maybe in one of the cases that are going on.
Or one, if you have a conference, because there's so much going on now, you should have, you know, gambling law conferences. I'd love to speak.
Absolutely, Professor Rose. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank
viewers,
you.
If you enjoyed this conversation, do hit the subscribe button and subscribe to our YouTube channel and our social media pages given in the links below. We'll be back with another episode soon. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Jay. Bye-bye.